Commander Zektar stood before the massive viewing window of his flagship, watching the small blue planet slowly rotate beneath him. Earth, the humans called it. Such a simple name for such a troublesome world. His forearms crossed behind his back as he studied the surface with mild interest. The planet looked peaceful from up here, almost beautiful with its white clouds and blue oceans. But Zektar knew better than to be fooled by appearances. The Galactic Consortium had been watching this world for over 300 years now. When their scouts first discovered the humans, the Consortium leaders had laughed. Another primitive species, they said. Another world full of creatures who still fought with metal weapons and burned fossil fuels for energy. The humans were barely worth noticing, except as a curiosity. That was before they realized how fast humans learned. Zektar touched a control panel with one of his secondary hands. The screen in front of him filled with data about the human population. 12 billion of them now, all trapped in their own solar system by the Consortium's invisible barriers. They could send their little ships to their moon, even to the red planet they called Mars. But they could never leave. The Consortium made sure of that, sir. The voice belonged to his aide, a young hegemony officer named Velnox. The morning reports are ready. Zektar turned away from the window. His species, the hegemony, were tall and thin with pale gray skin. They had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years before the Consortium was even formed. His people were patient, logical, and careful. They had to be. The galaxy was full of dangerous species, and the hegemony had survived by being smarter than everyone else. What do the reports say? Zektar asked. Velnox activated his datapad. The human work crews on Mining Station 7 completed their quota 3 days early. Again. The biological research teams say the human subjects are showing unusual resistance to the new medications. And there was another incident on Transport Ship 12. Zektar's eyes narrowed. What kind of incident? A human worker attacked one of our guards. The human was unarmed, but he managed to break the guard's arm before being stopped. The guard was wearing full protective armor. This was not the first time Zektar had heard such reports. Humans were supposed to be weak. They were smaller than most Consortium species. They lived for less than a century, and they had no natural weapons like claws or poison. But somehow they kept surprising everyone. What happened to the human? Zektar asked. Terminated as per protocol, Velnox replied. Zektar nodded. The Consortium had clear rules about rebellious behavior. Any species that showed aggression toward their betters had to be controlled quickly and firmly. It was the only way to maintain order across a galaxy filled with billions of different creatures. But something about the humans bothered him. They were too adaptable, too quick to learn, and there was something in their eyes when they looked at their captors. Not fear exactly, not even hatred. Something else. Something that made even experienced hegemony commanders uncomfortable. Sir, there's one more thing, Velnox said. The Archives Division has been asking questions about the human homeworld again. Zektar felt a chill run down his spine. The Archives Division was made up of the galaxy's oldest species, the ones who remembered things from before the Consortium was formed. They kept records that went back millions of years, and sometimes they asked uncomfortable questions. What kind of questions? They want to know if we've found any connection between humans and the old legends, the ones about the Devourers. Every child in the galaxy knew the stories of the Devourers, ancient creatures of myth and legend who had once swept across the stars like a plague. The stories said they consumed entire worlds, not for food or resources, but simply because they could. They were supposed to be the reason why so many star systems in the outer rim were empty now. Nothing but dead worlds and asteroid fields. But they were just stories, legends, myths to frighten young creatures and teach them about the dangers of unchecked expansion, weren't they? The humans are nothing like the Devourers, Zektar said firmly. They're primitive, emotional, they barely had spaceflight when we found them. Yes, sir. That's what I told the Archives Division. But they seemed concerned. Zektar dismissed his aide and returned to the viewing window. Below him, Earth continued its slow rotation. Somewhere down there, 12 billion humans were living their lives, working in Consortium facilities, raising their children under alien rule. They seemed so harmless from up here. But Zektar had read all the reports. He knew about the human scientists who solved problems in ways that baffled their alien supervisors. He knew about the human workers who could adapt to any environment, survive in conditions that killed other species, and learn new skills faster than anyone thought possible. He also knew about the rumors. whispered stories from the guard units about humans who moved too quietly, who watched everything with too much intelligence, who asked too many questions. There were reports of humans working together in ways that seemed innocent, but felt coordinated. Reports of human children who played games that looked suspiciously like military training exercises. Most disturbing of all were the reports from the biological research labs. Human test subjects who survived experiments that should have killed them. Humans who showed no signs of breaking even under extreme stress. Humans who seemed to be studying their captors as much as they were being studied. Dr. Sarah Chen was one of those humans. She worked in Research Facility Omega-7, studying alien biology and medicine. On paper, she was a model prisoner. She followed orders, completed her work efficiently, and caused no trouble. But something about her made the facility guards nervous. Maybe it was the way she looked at them. Not with fear or hatred, but with a kind of clinical interest, like she was taking notes, remembering everything. Dr. Chen stood in her laboratory surrounded by samples from dozens of different alien species. The consortium thought they were using her knowledge of biology to improve their medical treatments. They thought she was helping them. They were wrong. Every sample she studied, every alien she examined, every piece of equipment she was allowed to use, all of it was teaching her things the consortium never intended her to learn. She knew which species were vulnerable to certain toxins. She knew which ones had weak immune systems. She knew how their technology worked, where their ships were vulnerable, and most importantly, she knew they underestimated humans. That was their first mistake, and if Dr. Chen was right about what she saw in the classified files, it wouldn't be their last. The galaxy was full of predators and prey, conquerors and conquered. The consortium had ruled for millennia by understanding which was which. They thought they had identified humanity's place in that order. They thought humans were prey. But somewhere in the asteroid belt beyond Mars, hidden in the cold darkness between worlds, Admiral Marcus Stone was putting the finishing touches on humanity's first real starship. Not the primitive chemical rockets the consortium allowed them to build, but something else. Something better. Something the aliens had never seen before. The consortium had made one crucial error in their assessment of humanity. They had studied human history and seen the wars, the violence, the seemingly endless cycle of conflict and destruction. They had concluded that humans were dangerously aggressive but ultimately self-destructive. What they had failed to understand was that humans didn't fight because they were violent. They fought because they were survivors. And survivors, when pushed too far, didn't just fight back. They fought to win. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, transmitted across every screen on Earth simultaneously. The consortium's seal filled the displays, a circle of intertwined symbols representing the 57 species that ruled the galaxy. But it was the voice that followed that made Dr. Sarah Chen's blood turn cold. Attention, human subjects of Earth. The Galactic Consortium has determined that your species will be relocated to serve the greater good of galactic civilization. Prepare for immediate transport to the Andromeda construction project. Compliance is mandatory. Resistance will result in termination. Sarah's hands trembled as she watched the announcement from her laboratory. Around her, alien guards were already moving with military precision, sealing exits and activating containment protocols. This wasn't a request or a negotiation. This was the end of everything. The Andromeda construction project was something the consortium had been working on for decades. A massive space station designed to bridge the gap between galaxies, allowing them to expand their empire even further. Sarah had seen the classified reports. The project required millions of workers and the conditions were lethal. Average survival time was 6 months. No one was expected to live long enough to see their families again. It was slavery with a death sentence attached. Within hours, consortium ships began descending through Earth's atmosphere. Massive transport vessels that blocked out the sun as they settled over major cities. Ground forces emerged. Heavily armed soldiers from a dozen different species, all following the same orders. Round up the humans, separate the families, load them onto the ships. Sarah watched from her laboratory window as the first transport landed in the courtyard below. Human workers were being herded into lines, their alien supervisors shouting orders in languages most of them didn't understand. Children were crying. Parents were reaching for each other as guards pushed them toward different ships. That's when Sarah saw her daughter. Emma was only 12 years old, too young to understand what was happening but old enough to be afraid. She was in a line with other children, clutching a small stuffed animal that Sarah had made for her years ago. A guard was pushing the children forward, his weapon ready for anyone who might resist. Sarah ran. She abandoned her workstation, ignored the alarms that began blaring as she left her assigned area, and sprinted through the corridors of the research facility. She had to reach Emma, had to at least say goodbye. She made it as far as the main entrance before a hegemony guard stopped her. The tall, gray-skinned alien raised one of his forearms, signaling her to halt. "Return to your station, human," the guard said in broken English. "Your work assignment has not changed." "My daughter," Sarah gasped, pointing toward the courtyard. "She's just a child. Please let me." "Your offspring is no longer your concern," the guard replied. "Return to your station immediately." Sarah looked past the guard and saw Emma being pushed toward the transport ship. Her daughter looked back, their eyes meeting for just a moment across the chaos of the courtyard. Emma mouthed the word mama but couldn't make any sound over the noise. "Please," Sarah begged. "Just let me hold her for 1 minute. I'll do whatever you want. I'll work twice as hard." The guard's weapon discharged with a sharp crack. The energy blast caught Emma in the chest, lifting her small body off the ground and throwing her backward. The stuffed animal fell from her hands as she hit the ground and didn't move again. The guard turned back to Sarah with cold, mechanical efficiency. "Compliance is mandatory. Resistance results in termination. Return to your station." Sarah stood frozen, staring at the small, still form of her daughter lying in the dirt. Around them, other humans were screaming, crying, reaching for their own family members. The guards were shooting anyone who stepped out of line, anyone who resisted, anyone who tried to help. They were killing children to make a point. Something broke inside Sarah Chen that day. Not her spirit. That remained intact, burning brighter than ever. What broke was her faith that these aliens could be reasoned with, negotiated with, or appealed to on any level that resembled mercy or justice. They weren't conquerors. They were exterminators, and they had just made the biggest mistake of their very long lives. Across Earth, similar scenes were playing out. Families torn apart, communities destroyed, children murdered in front of their parents to ensure compliance. The consortium had calculated that a show of overwhelming force would break human resistance before it could begin. They were right about one thing: human resistance was broken. What they hadn't expected was what would replace it. Admiral Marcus Stone received the activation codes 48 hours after the harvesting began. The codes came from resistance cells across Earth, transmitted through communication networks the aliens didn't even know existed. Each code was embedded with a simple message: "They killed our children." Stone was aboard the hidden shipyard in the asteroid belt when the messages arrived. For 3 centuries, humans had been secretly building, planning, and preparing for this moment. Not for rebellion. Rebellion implied they still recognized consortium authority. This was something else entirely. Stone activated the communication array and sent a single transmission to every hidden human facility in the solar system. The message was brief: "Execute Protocol 7, no prisoners, no mercy. No surrender." Within hours, the first consortium patrol ships began disappearing. The aliens had made a fundamental error in their understanding of human nature. They had studied human history and concluded that humans were violent, but ultimately predictable. They fought in patterns, followed rules of engagement, and could be controlled through superior force. But the aliens had studied the wrong kind of human warfare. They had looked at the formal conflicts, the wars between nations with declared objectives and negotiated endings. They had missed the other kind of war, the kind humans fought when their backs were against the wall and their children were threatened. The kind of war where rules didn't matter anymore. Captain Elena Vasquez commanded the first human strike, forced to leave Earth's solar system. Her ship was small compared to consortium vessels, built for speed and stealth rather than heavy combat. But it carried something the aliens had never encountered before: weapons designed specifically to kill them. Dr. Chen had provided the biological data, human engineers had built the delivery systems, and Captain Vasquez was going to test them on the species that had murdered her daughter. The target was a consortium supply depot in the Wolf system, 3 light-years from Earth, a routine facility with minimal defenses used to refuel and resupply patrol ships, the kind of target that would send a message without triggering a massive military response, or so the humans hoped. Vasquez's ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, running silent and cold. Her crew of 23 volunteers began their final preparations. Each of them had lost family members in the harvesting. Each of them had volunteered for what was almost certainly a suicide mission. But as they approached the depot, something unexpected happened. Other ships began appearing on their sensors. Human ships emerging from hyperspace all around the system, dozens of them, all carrying the same cargo, all with the same mission. The consortium had awakened something they didn't understand. They had pushed a species beyond the breaking point and discovered that humans didn't break the way other species did. They evolved, and evolution, as the consortium was about to learn, was not always a gradual process. Sometimes it happened all at once in a burst of adaptation that transformed an entire species overnight. The harvest was supposed to be the end of humanity's story. Instead, it was the beginning of the galaxy's worst nightmare. Captain Elena Vasquez watched through her ship's view screen as the consortium supply depot exploded in a brilliant flash of white light. The destruction was beautiful in its completeness. The entire facility simply ceased to exist, vaporized by weapons that shouldn't have been possible for a supposedly primitive species to build. Target eliminated, her weapons officer reported. No survivors detected. Around the Wolf system, 23 other human ships were completing their own attacks. Consortium outposts, patrol stations, and supply convoys were being systematically destroyed with surgical precision. This wasn't random violence or desperate revenge. This was warfare conducted by a species that had spent 3 centuries studying their enemies, while pretending to be helpless. The aliens had made their first mistake when they underestimated human intelligence. Their second mistake was assuming that human emotion would make them sloppy and predictable. In reality, human emotion had made them focused and methodical. Elena opened a communication channel to the other strike teams. Phase 1 complete. All teams report status. The responses came in quickly. Every target had been eliminated. Every human ship was intact and operational. 0 casualties among the strike forces, while consortium losses were total and devastating. Beginning Phase 2, Elena announced. Remember, we're not here to fight fair. We're here to win. The human fleet split up, each ship heading to a different system. They would hit targets throughout consortium space, always staying mobile, never fighting a pitched battle they couldn't win. It was a strategy the aliens had never seen before because no civilized species fought this way. But humans had learned a long time ago that civilization was a luxury you could only afford when your children weren't being murdered. Back on Earth, the consortium garrison was discovering that their human workers had vanished overnight. Every facility, every laboratory, every mining operation, all suddenly empty of human personnel. The aliens searched frantically, assuming the humans were hiding somewhere in their cities or underground complexes. They never thought to look in space. Dr. Sarah Chen was aboard one of the hidden stations in the asteroid belt, working in a laboratory that made her old consortium facility look primitive by comparison. For 300 years, humans had been reverse engineering alien technology, improving it and combining it with their own innovations. The result was equipment that surpassed anything the galaxy's ruling species possessed. Status report on the biological weapons, she said to her research team. The first batch is ready for deployment, replied Dr. Martinez, a geneticist who had lost his entire family in the harvesting. Virus strains specifically designed for hegemony, Krillian, and Vorthak physiology. Transmission rate is optimal, and the incubation period is exactly 72 hours. Sarah nodded grimly. The consortium had given them detailed biological samples of every major species in their empire, supposedly for medical research. They had never imagined that humans might use that information to create targeted biological weapons. What about the delivery systems? Captain Vasquez's team has confirmed successful deployment at 17 different locations. The viruses should begin manifesting symptoms within the next few days. Projected casualty rates range from 60 to 90% depending on species. Sarah felt a cold satisfaction at those numbers. The consortium had treated biological warfare as unthinkable, a line that civilized species would never cross. They had never encountered a species that didn't consider itself civilized anymore. Meanwhile, in the outer rim of consortium space, Admiral Marcus Stone was coordinating the largest human military operation in history. His flagship was enormous by human standards but still smaller than most consortium vessels. What made it dangerous wasn't its size but its crew, humans who had spent their entire lives preparing for this moment. "Admiral, we're receiving surrender requests from the Talari system," his communications officer reported. "They're offering to switch sides if we guarantee their survival." Stone considered this for a moment. The Talari were a minor species that had joined the consortium more out of fear than loyalty. They had never directly harmed humans, and their territory included several strategically important systems. Accept their surrender, Stone decided, but make it clear that any species that switches sides after this point will be treated as enemy combatants. "We're only offering this option once," it was a calculated decision. Stone wanted to give the galaxy's smaller species a chance to abandon the consortium before the real fighting began. Because what was happening now wasn't the war, it was just the opening move. The war would begin when the consortium's main fleets arrived. "Commander, Zektar was aboard his flagship when the reports started coming in. At first they seemed impossible. Entire systems going dark, patrol fleets vanishing without a trace, supply lines being cut with precision that suggested detailed knowledge of consortium operations. How many ships have we lost?" he asked his aide. "Initial estimates suggest over 300 vessels destroyed in the past 72 hours. Velnox replied. "But sir, that's not the worst part." Zektar's forearms tensed. "What else?" "The attacks are coordinated. They're not random raids. They're following a strategic pattern. Someone is systematically dismantling our infrastructure, and they know exactly where to hit us to cause maximum damage." This was impossible. The humans had no military fleet, no advanced weapons, no knowledge of consortium operations beyond their own solar system. "Unless—" "Get me a direct line to the Archives Division," Zektar ordered. "I need to know everything they have about human history. Everything." But even as he spoke, Zektar was beginning to understand the truth. The humans hadn't been primitive when the consortium found them. They had been pretending. For 3 centuries they had been watching, learning, and preparing. The consortium had thought they were keeping humans in a cage. In reality, they had been feeding intelligence to the galaxy's most dangerous predator. On a research station orbiting Jupiter, human scientists were making the final adjustments to their most ambitious project yet. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense, it was something much more sophisticated. Something that would demonstrate to the galaxy exactly what kind of species they were dealing with. Dr. Amanda Foster, the project's lead scientist, initiated the final sequence, beginning quantum cascade in 3, 2, 1 mark. Across the galaxy, every piece of consortium technology that relied on quantum field manipulation, which was virtually all of their advanced systems, began to malfunction simultaneously. Ships lost power, communication networks went dark, planetary defense systems shut down. In a single moment, humans had demonstrated that they hadn't just reverse-engineered alien technology, they had improved it to the point where they could turn it against its creators. The consortium's technological advantage, built up over millions of years of galactic dominance, had just become their greatest weakness. Captain Vasquez received new orders as her ship approached the Krillian home system. "Elena, this is Admiral Stone. Phase 3 is authorized. You know what to do." Elena looked at her crew, 23 volunteers who had signed up for a suicide mission and found themselves on the winning side of an interstellar war. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just been given permission to demonstrate why the galaxy used to fear us." She activated the ship's new weapon. Systems. Devices built using principles that the consortium's brightest scientists couldn't understand. The weapons didn't just destroy targets. They consumed them, broke them down at the molecular level, and converted the matter into energy that powered the next shot. It was technology that seemed almost magical, until you understood the science behind it. Humans had always been good at turning science into weapons. The galaxy was about to remember why. The Krillian homeworld had been the center of galactic commerce for over 2 million years. Its crystalline cities reached into the clouds, connected by transport tubes that carried billions of beings every day. The planet's 3 moons housed the galaxy's most advanced shipyards, while its orbital stations controlled trade routes that spanned half the known universe. It took Captain Elena Vasquez exactly 14 minutes to reduce it all to rubble. Her ship emerged from hyperspace alone, a single small vessel against the mightiest defenses in consortium space. The Krillians had time to detect her arrival, time to charge their planetary defense grid, time to launch their interceptor squadrons. They had time to do everything except understand what they were facing. Elena's weapons didn't behave like anything in the consortium's databases. Instead of energy beams or projectile weapons, they released something that looked like black fire, waves of darkness that consumed everything they touched. Ships, stations, buildings, even the atmosphere itself seemed to be devoured by the hungry darkness. Within minutes, the Krillian fleet was gone. Within hours, their cities were collapsing into themselves, pulled down by gravitational forces that shouldn't have existed. By the end of the day, the homeworld of one of the galaxy's most powerful species was nothing but a ball of compressed matter orbiting a dying star. Elena broadcast a single message before jumping back to hyperspace. This is what mercy looks like. Surrender now, or the next world dies slower. Across the galaxy, the message was received by every functioning consortium communication array. Along with it came something else. Archaeological data that made the galaxy's oldest species remember why they had nightmares. The data came from excavations on the Krillian homeworld, conducted in the final moments before its destruction. Human forces had discovered something buried beneath the planet's capital city. Ruins that predated Krillian civilization by millions of years. Ruins that told a story the galaxy had tried very hard to forget. The architect, known as Crystal Song of Stars, was among the last of her kind, a being so old she remembered when the galaxy was young. She floated in her crystalline chamber aboard the consortium flagship, her faceted body pulsing with colors that had no names in any modern language. When the human archaeological data reached her, those colors shifted to shades of terror that her species hadn't displayed for eons. Commander Zektar. Her voice resonated through the ship's communication system. You must see this immediately. Zektar arrived at her chamber within minutes, along with representatives from the consortium's other elder species. They found Crystal Song of Stars displaying holographic images that made their blood run cold. The images showed cities built in a style that was unmistakably human, but impossibly ancient. Architecture that combined familiar geometric patterns with technologies that defied understanding. And carved into every surface were symbols that translated to a single terrifying concept. We came, we saw, we consumed. The legends are true, Crystal Song of Stars sang in harmonies of despair. The humans are not from Earth. Earth was their prison and we were their jailers. Our ancestors found them in the void between galaxies, consuming entire star systems. It took every species in the galaxy working together to stop them, and even then we couldn't destroy them. We could only contain them. More images flashed through the holographic display, star charts showing the paths of destruction across the ancient galaxy, records of species that had existed for millions of years, wiped out in decades, and at the center of it all a species that the old texts called by many names. The Devourers, the endless hunger, the death that walks between stars. Humans. How did we forget? Asked Velnox, his voice barely a whisper. Because we wanted to forget, replied another elder, a gas form being called the Memory Keeper. The trauma was too great. Each generation we told ourselves the stories were exaggerations, myths, cautionary tales. We convinced ourselves that such beings could never really exist. But they were contained, Zektar protested, locked in their solar system. Their technology was primitive when we found them. Crystal Song of Stars pulsed with bitter irony. Their technology was not primitive. It was dormant. We thought we were observing a species in decline, but we were watching them heal, recover, plan. The implications hit Zektar like a physical blow. Every human the consortium had studied, every piece of technology they had observed, every aspect of human behavior they had cataloged, all of it had been an act. A performance designed to lull their captors into complacency. How long have they been planning this? He asked. Since the moment we put them in that cage, the Memory Keeper replied. Humans don't forget. They don't forgive. They just wait for the right opportunity to remind the galaxy why we used to fear them. As if summoned by their conversation, a new transmission arrived. This one came from Admiral Stone himself, broadcast from a human dreadnought that was somehow larger than anything in the consortium fleet, despite being built in secret over just 3 centuries. Stone appeared on the screen as a tall, gray-haired man with eyes that held no emotion whatsoever. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Citizens of the Galactic Consortium. My name is Marcus Stone, and I speak for humanity. 3 days ago, you began what you called a harvest. You murdered our children to demonstrate your power. You made a mistake. Behind Stone, the camera panned across the bridge of his ship. It was filled with humans, but not the primitive, emotional creatures the Consortium remembered. These humans moved with mechanical precision, their faces showing the same cold certainty as their admiral. You studied our history and concluded that we were violent, but manageable. You missed the important lesson. We are not violent by nature. We are thorough by nature. When we decide something needs to be eliminated, we eliminate it completely. The transmission shifted to show external views of Stone's fleet, hundreds of ships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, armed with weapons that violated the known laws of physics, ships that somehow made space itself seem afraid of them. The Krillian homeworld was a demonstration, Stone continued. Every species in the Consortium now has 24 hours to surrender unconditionally. Any species that refuses will be removed from existence. Not conquered, not subjugated, removed. The transmission ended, leaving the Consortium leadership in stunned silence. General Hassan al-Rashid was leading the assault on the Consortium's capital world when the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. His Marines had broken through the planet's defenses and were fighting their way toward the Central Command, complex when they discovered something that explained everything. Hidden in the deepest vaults beneath the Consortium capital were the real historical records, the ones that told the true story of humanity's first expansion into the galaxy. The records that revealed why Earth wasn't humanity's homeworld. Earth was their prison. Millions of years ago, humans had emerged from somewhere beyond the edge of known space. They had swept through the galaxy like a plague, consuming entire civilizations not out of malice but out of simple biological necessity. They were a species that had evolved to expand, to grow, to take everything they encountered and make it their own. The galaxy's elder species had united against them in a war that lasted millennia. In the end, they had managed to drive the humans back, but they couldn't destroy them. Instead, they had built the ultimate prison, an isolated star system surrounded by barriers that could never be broken. From the inside, they had placed the surviving humans on a world called Earth and waited for them to forget who they were. For millions of years, it had worked. Humanity had devolved, becoming primitive, tribal, seemingly harmless. The galaxy had relaxed its guard, but humans didn't forget. They just waited. Hassan's forces reached the Consortium's main command center to find it empty except for a single crystalline being, Crystal Song of Stars, waiting for them with something like resignation. "You have come home," she sang to Hassan in harmonies of acceptance and despair. "The galaxy belongs to you again, as it always did. We should never have thought we could keep the Devourer's cage forever." Hassan looked at the ancient being with something like pity. "We're not the same species that you imprisoned," he said. "We've learned patience, discipline. We've learned to be selective about what we consume. But you are still devourers," Crystal Song of Stars replied. "It is what you are. What you have always been." Hassan nodded slowly. "Yes, but now we choose what to devour. And right now we choose to devour those who kill our children." The galaxy had awakened its ancient nightmare. But this time the nightmare was focused, organized, and absolutely without mercy. The real war was about to begin. 6 months after the fall of the Consortium capital, the galaxy had grown very quiet. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in her new office aboard humanity's flagship, looking out at what had once been the most heavily defended star system in known space. Where the Consortium's mighty fortress worlds had once orbited, there was now only empty space and drifting debris. The species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia had learned too late that some prisoners should never be released. A soft chime indicated someone was requesting entry. "Come in," Sarah called out. The door slid open to admit a delegation of surviving Consortium species. 3 beings from races that had surrendered early enough to avoid extinction. A Talari diplomat with purple skin and 6 arms. A Vorthak military commander whose insectoid features clicked nervously, and a young hegemony officer who looked remarkably like the late Commander Zektar. Director Chen, the Talari, spoke first, his translator rendering his words in perfect English. "We come seeking clarification on the new territorial assignments." Sarah gestured for them to sit. The furniture in her office was designed for multiple species, one of the few accommodations humanity made for their former captors. It was a small mercy, and they were grateful for any mercy at all. The assignments are quite simple, Sarah replied, activating a holographic display of the galaxy. Large sections were colored in human blue, while smaller regions showed the territories granted to surviving species. You get the systems we've assigned to you. You govern them according to human standards. You report to us monthly. You never ever expand beyond your borders without explicit permission. The Vorthok commander's antennae twitched anxiously. And if we require more resources? More space? Our populations are recovering, and the assigned territories may not be sufficient in the coming centuries. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes made all three aliens instinctively lean back. Then you apply to us for expansion rights. If we approve your request, you will be granted additional systems. If we deny your request, you learn to live with what you have. If you expand without permission, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the galaxy knew what happened to species that violated human directives. The Krillians had been the first to discover it, but they weren't the last. 7 species had tested human resolve in the past 6 months. 7 species no longer existed. We understand, the hegemony officer said quickly. Director, may I ask, what are humanity's long-term intentions? Will this arrangement be permanent? Sarah considered the question. It was one she had asked herself many times since the war ended. Humanity had reclaimed their position as the galaxy's apex predator. But what did they plan to do with that power? The arrangement will last as long as you honor it, she replied finally. Humanity has no interest in micromanaging every species in the galaxy. We have our own projects, our own goals, but we will never again allow anyone to threaten human children. Ever. The 3 aliens exchanged glances. They had all seen the reports from the war's final battles. Human forces that fought with mechanical precision and absolutely no regard for their own survival. Ships that rammed enemy vessels when their weapons ran out of ammunition. Soldiers who continued fighting even after sustaining injuries that should have been fatal. It was the kind of warfare that civilized species found disturbing. It was also the kind of warfare that had ended the consortium in less than a year. After the delegation left, Sarah returned to her work. Her current project involved analyzing the biological data from 17 different species to determine which ones posed potential future threats to humanity. It was methodical, scientific work, the same kind of research she had done under consortium rule, but with very different objectives. The door chimed again. This time it was Admiral Stone. Marcus Stone had aged considerably since the war began. His hair was completely white now, and his face bore the lines of someone who had made decisions that would echo through history. But his eyes remained sharp, and his presence still commanded absolute respect. Sarah, he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. How are our new neighbors behaving? Like prey animals, Sarah replied with dark humor. Nervous, obedient, constantly seeking reassurance that they're not about to be eliminated. It's almost sad, really. Stone nodded grimly. I received a report from the Outer Rim territories today. We've discovered 3 more dead worlds. Systems that were inhabited millions of years ago but went dark during humanity's first expansion. The archaeological teams think we wiped out over 200 species during that period. Sarah looked up from her datapad. Feeling guilty, Marcus? No, Stone replied without hesitation. Those species chose to fight us instead of submitting. Just like the consortium did. The results were predictable. And if other species make the same choice in the future, then they'll get the same results, Stone said matter-of-factly. Sarah, we've had this conversation before. Humanity didn't choose to be what we are. Evolution made us into the galaxy's ultimate predator. The consortium chose to cage us instead of coexisting with us. When they finally decided to eliminate us, they sealed their own fate. Sarah knew he was right, but sometimes she wondered if they had become something monstrous in their quest for survival. Then she would remember Emma's small body lying in the dirt, and the wondering would stop. Have you seen the latest reports from Earth? Stone asked, changing the subject. The reconstruction is proceeding ahead of schedule, Sarah replied. Population is back up to 10 billion, and the new cities are more advanced than anything that existed before the war. Most importantly, no human child will ever again live under alien rule. Stone smiled for the first time in months. That was always the point, wasn't it? Everything else, the conquest, the revenge, the new galactic order, all of that was just means to an end. The end was making sure our children would be safe. And they are, Sarah confirmed. Every human child born since the war has grown up knowing that their species is the most powerful force in the galaxy. They'll never know what it's like to be helpless. Across the galaxy, that reality was being demonstrated daily. Human patrol fleets moved through space with casual authority, their mere presence enough to keep entire star systems in line. Human colonies were being established on worlds that had once been forbidden to them, terraforming planets with technologies that surpassed anything the consortium had possessed. But more importantly, human children were growing up free. Captain Elena Vasquez, now Admiral Vasquez, commanded the human fleet responsible for the galaxy's eastern sectors. Her ships patrolled trade routes, investigated disturbances, and occasionally reminded uppity species why challenging human authority was a fatal mistake. She was reviewing reports from her sector when her communications officer approached with a puzzled expression. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Andor system. It's unusual." "Unusual how?" "It's a thank you message, ma'am, from the Talari colonists there. They're thanking us for, and I quote, creating the most prosperous and peaceful era in galactic history." Elena raised an eyebrow. "They're thanking us for conquering them?" "Apparently, ma'am. Trade is flourishing. Conflicts between species have virtually ended, and scientific advancement is proceeding at unprecedented rates. They say life is better under human rule than it ever was under the consortium." Elena considered this. It wasn't the first such message they had received. Across the galaxy, non-human species were discovering that human rule was far more benevolent than they had expected. Humans didn't enslave other species or conduct brutal experiments on them. They didn't separate families or murder children to make political points. They simply demanded submission, and as long as they received it, they left other species alone to prosper. "Send a standard acknowledgement," Elena ordered, "and make a note in our files that the Andor system remains compliant and productive." As her communications officer departed, Elena returned to her reports. Tomorrow, her fleet would be conducting maneuvers near the Keth Nebula, where long-range sensors had detected unusual energy signatures. Probably nothing dangerous, but humans had learned to investigate everything thoroughly. After all, the galaxy was full of species that had once thought they were safe from human attention. Most of them had been wrong about that, but for now the galaxy was at peace. A peace built on the understanding that humanity had returned to its rightful place as the species that other species feared. It was not a peace built on love or mutual respect. It was a peace built on the absolute certainty that crossing humanity would result in extinction. And for the first time in millions of years, every human child could sleep safely, knowing that they were protected by the galaxy's most perfect predator. The nightmare that the galaxy had tried to forget had awakened. But this time the nightmare was their protector, as long as they remembered who was really in charge.